Hi everyone, I'm Christina Dmitrievski. I'm a board member of the United Macedonian Diaspora and global chairwoman for its Young Leaders Program, Generation M. I hope you guys had a great Easter holiday and I hope you're all staying safe and healthy at home. Welcome to our third of 4 UMD Generation M virtual hours with Mario Hristowski of the growingly popular YouTube series Mario's History Talks on the topic of the Prince of Pirin, the life of Yane Sandanski, which today actually happens to be the 105th anniversary since the assassination of Yane Sandanski. Please feel free to take to social media with the hashtag Mario's History Talks and at @UMDiaspora and at Gen Macedonia to share about tonight's event. Everyone has been muted, and if you have any questions, please write them in the chat and Mario will try his best to answer as many as possible. A few announcements before we turn it over to Mario. We mentioned this on last week's call, but wanted to reiterate. UMD Generation M launched a super exciting new emerging leaders mentorship program. If anyone would like to be a mentor or be a mentee, please visit UMD's website or click the link that we'll share in the chat. We've received quite a lot of interest and can't wait to pair up prospective mentors with mentees. In case social distancing is hitting you hard, gather some committee and join us for Macedonian virtual trivia night and flex your Macedonian knowledge tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Time. The link will be provided to you in the chat. And I guess with that, I will turn it over to Mario.
So I appreciate everybody joining me tonight. I know we started a little late here, but we'll make best use of your time. We'll make this engaging for you and hopefully give you some new knowledge about a really great man in Macedonian history. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mario Hristowski. I'm going to skip the introductions. If we don't know each other yet, shoot me a message. I don't bite. I'm not going to quiz you after the show. So send me a message. Let's get to know one another. And with that, let's get started. Before I do want to get started here, I do want to talk about just a couple of things, as always, in terms of how we can go about interpreting history. So I have 3 rules. I call them Mario's 3 rules for studying history. It's going to be both practical in terms of what we're talking tonight, and when you decide to study Macedonian history for yourself. So rule number 1, never have any heroes that are not fictional. Never have heroes that are real. The only people you should call heroes are your Batman and your Superman, perhaps even, some other literary figures. Don't have real heroes because they're people just like the rest of us. And the more you discover them, the more you discover their faults, the more disillusioned you become. So never have heroes that are real. Secondly, put more weight on a person's deeds, not so much their words. You'll find in Macedonian history, it is replete with examples of individuals saying one thing, saying they're fighting for Macedonia, but going completely different direction. And during this time period, you're definitely going to hear things that you're not comfortable with. That's all right. That's history. But I encourage you, look past it, look at what this person did, and any person, and where their actions actually lay, not what words they said. As we'll find out, words are very politicized and changed heavily depending on circumstance. And finally, number 3, this is something I've said many times before, but study enough to be dangerous in the critical areas that are important to our identity, but then move on. Don't rush too quickly into one subject if you're not comfortable or not able to stomach things you're not used to, or things that you may find in opposition to what you've been told. Just keep in mind, despite what you're going to hear, and this is just a good framework for all of history, the truth is still on our side. We are the Macedonian people, and it is exactly as we say it is. Now, the way that we've been taught, that could be off, but the truth is still on our side. So if you're able to stomach a lot of uncomfortable things about our past and know that the truth is still with us, definitely pace yourself. So that's all I'm going to tell you. And with this, I'm going to get started here and keep these couple things in mind. We're talking about a real person with real faults, real shortcomings, but also real glory. And he was a great giant in Macedonian history, but he was a person nonetheless. So let's get started talking about Yane Sandanski, the Prince of Pirin. So Yane was born May 18th, 1872 in the village of Vlahi, which is a village in present-day Pirinska Macedonia, Pirin, Macedonia, which is currently under Bulgarian occupation. Now, at age 5, actually, his parents and his whole family did have to move to the regional center of Gorna Jumaya, which is in the Blagoevgrad region of Pirinska Macedonia, after the Russo-Turkish War. So basically a lot of bloodshed, and they had to move to a new location. Now, Yane actually does come from quite a patriotic background. His father, Ivan, was involved in the Kresna Revolution of 1878. Now, what's significant about the Kresna Revolution was it was one of the first major uprisings against the Ottoman Empire, but also one of the first early inklings of a distinct Macedonian identity that was not Greek or not Bulgarian and not Serbian. Now, the Macedonian identity is very complex, and arguably it was still in its infancy then. But really quickly, because his father was involved in this, the Kresna Revolution did have a constitution as a framework for their future independent Macedonian republic. And in the preamble of this constitution, of the Kresna uprising, we have the following line. With the blood we shed all over the Macedonian fields and forests, we serve freedom, as did the Macedonian army of Alexander the Great, with our slogan, freedom or death. So there you have it. As early as 1878, our ancestors did think they were related to Alexander the Great. Pretty remarkable. Well, let's keep talking about Yane now. So Yane, after that Kresna uprising, his whole family once again did have to relocate, as is the story for a lot of Macedonians during this time period. It's constant warfare, constant bloodshed. They had to relocate from one place to the next. So they basically moved to Dupnica in Western Bulgaria. Now, this is a part that was not part of Macedonia, but as you learn through history, many Macedonians did have to resort to moving to Bulgaria after various uprisings and repressions faced in their native Macedonia. So they moved to Dupnica there, and a lot of Macedonians actually did inhabit Bulgaria during this time period, especially after the Balkan Wars. In fact, at one period, the capital, Sofia, was actually majority Macedonian. It was more or less overrun by Macedonians. So this is kind of an early pattern that we're seeing here. So while he was in Dupnica, he did a number of odd jobs. After all, he was born in very extreme poverty. He did work as a shoemaker at one point, and at one point did help out his uncle in the local law office. And based on his memoirs, a little interesting side note about his childhood, playing with the neighborhood kids, as I'm sure many of us had growing up in Macedonia or just around other Macedonians, one of their many games that they played was playing komiti, fighting, child battles between themselves and the enemy, usually the Ottoman Empire. And Yane, even from 5 to 6 years, always picked the side of the Macedonian komita. A little early inspiration, a little foreshadowing as to what his life would become. So after this, he does eventually join the Bulgarian Army in 1892. He serves in the Bulgarian Army from 1892 to 1894. Now, I'm sure pretty much all of you are shocked. Why would a Macedonian join the Bulgarian Army? Well, complicated issue. If you remember, Macedonia didn't have its own institutions. As you know from my previous video, after the abolition of our church, we didn't have any legitimacy to who we were and who our language was. All churches and all schools, and especially military institutions for higher advancement in one's career, came through Bulgaria, more or less. So to actually go into a military academy was an escape from poverty. It was a great, great opportunity. And as we'll see, his experience in the military academy did shape who he would become as the future Macedonian leader that he was. So while there, he, like many others, found himself amongst many other Macedonians. Many Macedonians came to the Bulgarian army as a way not only for career advancement, but also to escape the misery and the enslavement of Macedonia. One of them was Goce Delchev. He did a similar thing as Yane Sandanski. Now, as luck would have it, they did not meet. But while he was there, he did meet many other Macedonians, particularly those that were influenced by the ideals of the Macedonian Revolutionary Organization. You might know it as VMRO, but historically, let's call it the Macedonian Revolutionary Organization. As we'll see, it's not always an accurate label, so let's stick with one that serves our purposes. So while there, he did start to become radicalized towards the idea of an independent Macedonia, autonomous, and the idea of liberation from the Ottoman Empire. And unfortunately, during this time period, he did fall under the influence of the Supreme Macedonian Committee. Now, that sounds kind of cool, right? Supreme Macedonian Committee. Hell, I'd like to join that. Fortunately, not the case. The Supreme Macedonian Committee, also called Macedonian the Vârhovisti, was a group of largely Macedonians, but Macedonians living in Bulgaria, who had gone there as emigres, but had since living there, basically adopted a full-on Bulgarian identity and a Bulgarian plan for Macedonia. So what was this Bulgarian plan for Macedonia? Well, basically unifying Macedonia to Bulgaria. And these were people that were, like I said, largely Macedonians, but the identity stopped and ended there. It was mostly by descent. For all intents and purposes, they considered themselves Bulgarians, and they wanted to attach Macedonia to Bulgaria. Many of these people were not only in the government in Sofia, there were their military colonels, there were their politicians. They had significant influence. They were in bed with the Bulgarian government, and they were serving the interests of the Bulgarian state as it saw the Macedonian question, which for them was annexation to Bulgaria. So Yane Sandanski was initially in the Supreme Macedonian Committee, but eventually he did switch. He switched to the Macedonian Revolutionary Organization by the 1900s, by early 1900. And what is the difference between Macedonian Revolutionary Org, MRO, versus the Supreme one? Well, you guessed it, it's Macedonian. It's regional, it's local, it's grassroots. For all intents and purposes, they didn't want a direct connection to Bulgaria. We'll get into this a little bit more, but it was a local phenomenon. It was not puppeteered nor directly financed by the Bulgarians, and as such, they didn't directly serve the interest of the Bulgarians. So Yane eventually does make the switch to VMRO, MRO, whatever you have it, formed in Solun in the late 1800s. So let's talk about VMRO during this time period very briefly so we can kind of understand this. So during this time period, Macedonia as a whole did not have a national identity. I know we like to think that it did, and it did in some parts. I mean, as early as the 1850s, we do see seedlings of it. And with the 1870s, with Ѓорѓiев, we do see some evidence of it beginning to form, but overall, it had not yet formed. This doesn't disqualify us as being a people. It just means we were a little late to the game. And why wouldn't we be? Our church was abolished, and nothing about our identity was recognized. So majority of Macedonia did not have a clear ethnic identity. In fact, there was a British historian that was traveling in Macedonia, and he asked the number of children in Ohrid, peasants. There were some ruins there from the ancient times, and he asked them, whose ruins are these? And they said, they're our ancestors. So the British journalist asked them, well, so were they Bulgarians? Were they Serbians? Or were they Greeks? And children, they didn't know what he was saying. They said, no, they weren't Turks. They were Christians like us, but they were freedmen. They had no idea about an ethnic identity. Nationalism, for all intents and purposes, is a product of a highly civilized, more developed country. Macedonia was still 85% agrarian feudal during this time period. And for VMRO, though, what you have to understand is the only people that were involved in it were men, young Macedonian men, educated by the Bulgarian schools, by the Bulgarian exarchate. And these schools were specifically designed to instill a further Bulgarian identity of the Macedonian people, the Macedonian population. So majority of VMRO was created by men that were products of their time in these Bulgarian schools. And even though they really had no clear consensus on the identity of the Macedonians, they didn't even have a clear political consensus as to how they would liberate Macedonia or what direction it would take. Their main goal was unifying around freeing Macedonia at whatever cost from the Ottomans, and the ideas of their identity or their nationalism, what kind of people they were simply tabled. They were not relevant to the discussion. In many cases, they did call themselves Macedono-Bulgarians, but as we'll see later, that didn't necessarily mean they saw themselves as the same people in Bulgaria. In fact, we have records that most Macedonians probably considered actual Bulgarians foreign people. In fact, they called them shopi. They wouldn't have recognized their language, and their customs would have been alien to them. But during this time period, it was simply all they knew. So again, look at their words, look at their deeds, don't look at their words. So let's go on. So after joining VMRO in the early 1900s, he was appointed in military command of the Ser region, or Seres in modern day Greek, of Aegean Macedonia in 1901 by the man himself, one of the greatest Macedonians, Goce Delchev. In fact, he leveraged Yane Sandanski's military experience in his organization of the Sidis region. And basically, even though Goce did have military background, Goce was an academic. He was not by any means a military type or a fighter. Yane Sandanski was. He was an imposing man. He did very well in military training, and he was a very skilled organizer. So he built networks around the Gorna Jumaya, which is in Pirinska Macedonia, and Sidis region, so linking Aegean Macedonia and Pirin Macedonia, basically funneling weapons, money, and resources between the various underground networks of VMRO. And he was very effective at this. And this is where the myth starts to form about him being the Prince of Pirin. He was very effective at what he did. He was very organized and very efficient. But you can be as organized as you want. If the population is poor, you're not going to be able to accumulate resources on the level that you need to. So what does he do? Well, he comes up with an idea with other revolutionaries from the time period around VMRO to kidnap an American Protestant by the name of Miss Ellen Stone, ransom her for money to be able to finance the organization and raise more weapons. So it happened. He was partially in charge of this, but she was kidnapped on September 3rd, 1901. And part of the reason they did actually kidnap her was they did need resources. And as we'll talk about a little bit more, most money, most weapons that did come from Bulgaria, which was more or less the majority, did come earmarked. What do I mean by that? It came with a price tag, not just monetarily. Weapons from Bulgaria meant more Bulgarian involvement in the revolution in Macedonia, more Bulgarian officers being sent to Macedonia, and less regionalism and more supranationalism with the actual Bulgarian state. So, of course, the Macedonian committeemen of VMRO looked for alternatives. This was one of their most dramatic and valiant ones. So, kidnapped Miss Stone on September 3rd, 1901. She is held ransom for 6 months. And finally, she is handed over back to the authorities after 6 months for 15,000 Turkish lira. And as you know from my previous videos, not only is there a great movie about this, the first color movie in Macedonia, but this is the United States' first ever international hostage situation. Macedonia basically baptized the US in fire in terms of its international and foreign relations. Very interesting story. Can't get into too much depth. I do encourage you to do your own research. So he does get the funds, and resources are accumulating now. And unfortunately, many in Macedonia, especially the VMRO, as I said, not a unified organization. They want to have autonomy for Macedonia, but couldn't have a centralized idea in terms of how to do it. There was a spectrum. Some wanted direct annexation to Bulgaria. Others wanted a federal union of which Macedonia would be an independent state like other Balkan states. However, they, at this stage, basically jumped the gun. They thought they were ready for the revolution to free Macedonia. What am I talking about? You guessed it, Ilinden. Now, there is evidence that Ilinden was initially roused as an idea by direct Bulgarian influence in VMRO, which it did have. There were people that were born in Bulgaria among the ranks. And there's good research, especially in the book by Duncan Perry, one of the greatest books actually in VMRO, that Ilinden was designed to fail to show Macedonians the need for direct Bulgarian intervention. Now, Yane, as well as Goce, were on the side of caution. They knew Macedonians were not ready for a full-scale revolution. We can look at the statistics, we can look at the weapons, we can look at the networks. Macedonia was simply not ready. Goce Delchev knew this better than anybody, and he agreed with Yane. Macedonians needed to be psychologically liberated first. Need to have freedom first in their minds, so they can then organize and actually shift their mentality away from this broken and disunified feudal society into a modern state that does fight unified for its freedom. Now, that being said, Ilinden was still planned to go on ahead. As we know, we don't have to get too much into it. It was a complete failure. There were areas that were liberated, but after all, we know how it ends. Bloodshed, anarchy, chaos, and the full boot of the Ottoman Empire imposed on the Macedonians once more. Now, what a lot of people do not realize about Ilinden, and kind of for many, the story of Macedonia's revolution does stop there, but the repercussions of Ilinden continued long after the final days of Kruševo. The full boot of the Ottoman Empire continued with the Macedonians. And as such, VMRO actually splintered because of this new situation they found themselves in. VMRO factionalized into numerous competing ideologies. If they weren't unified before the Ilinden uprising in terms of ideology, narrative, or politics, they certainly were not unified now. So basically, this is how VMRO split up. There were the moderate conservatives who, for all intents and purposes, were more right-wing, and they were closer in bed with the Bulgarians than they were previously. They did favor cooperation with Bulgaria. They did favor more of a closer union, and a lot of them did favor full-on annexation with Bulgaria at a certain stage. Now, on the other side, we have the Federalists, and this is where Yane Sandanski takes place. Yane was a Macedonian leftist. He was a liberal. He was a socialist. Now, let's get away from the modern American usage of the terms liberal and leftist. He was a leftist in terms of the idea that Macedonia, he wanted a Balkan federation with political, modern, liberal institutions. Again, I'm saying liberal in the universal sense of the word, of which Macedonia would be a co-equal state. He did not want annexation to Bulgaria, nor Bulgarian interference. So he basically was rejecting the Bulgarian ideal on Macedonia. He said, we're going to cooperate with all Balkan ethnic groups, but the Macedonian question is fundamentally Macedonian. It is not Bulgarian. So let's take a look at what he said here. This is a direct quote by Yane. Yes, Macedonia should not seek help outside itself, but within itself. Her freedom will not be a gift, but a bloody ransom, paid for with thousands of sacrifices, as we have given and will continue to give. Clear as day. For him, the Macedonian question rested solely with the Macedonian people. He was in line with Goce Delchev in this thinking. Goce was also a left-leaning Macedonian. He's joined by other Macedonians of the time period that joined this new faction, such as Dimo Hadzidimov, Pere Toshev, George Petrov, and of course Goce Delchev, who by this stage was already deceased, but ideologically they were similar. They were on the same spectrum. And finally, we do have another faction of VMRO headed by Boris Sarafov, who basically formed his own kind of following. He's very charismatic, very charming, and he used that to his advantage. He was the one that wanted high-scale assassinations and acts of terror to basically draw Europe into helping Macedonia. So what we have here is factionalism, division, and disunity. How common is that today? It's the disease of the Macedonian people. It's something that does splinter us. And we see that happen even with the people that we consider our heroes. Be careful on that word, like I said. So we do have, after Ilinden, basically emboldened factionalism led to violence between these various VMRO groups. In fact, Yane did order the assassinations of a number of right-leaning VMRO officials, such as Boris Sarafov and the Bulgarian Ivan Gavranov. He was actually from Bulgaria, but he was in VMRO. So Yane did begin to stake his claim in the future of Macedonia by eliminating numerous right-leaning, more pro-Bulgarian Macedonians. So we have a lot of chaos here, obviously. A lot of assassinations. In fact, Yane, there are numerous assassinations on his life as well. But in the meantime, while all this is happening, the Ottoman Empire is going through some remarkable changes. At this stage, the Ottoman Empire is called the sick old man of Europe. Now, this is a historic term, basically meaning that in the 1900s, the Ottoman Empire was, for all intents and purposes, a feudal state. It was still largely agrarian, still very, very lagging in its industrialization, still very backward. So there were attempts to modernize. One of them being the 1876 revision of the Constitution of the Ottoman Empire that basically made the Ottoman into a constitutional monarchy. Now, in 1908, the Sultan did try to reverse this constitutional change, and that sparked what we call the Young Turk Revolution. We don't need to get too much into it, but basically the Young Turk Revolution was another revolution to restore the Ottoman Empire back to its constitutional monarchy status. And Yane was a very active part in this. He saw this as an amazing opportunity to get involved with the inner framework of the Ottoman Empire. So what happens? Basically, the Ottoman parliament is opened up to multiple parties to be joined for representation. So Yane seizes this opportunity. He is, after all, a pragmatist. He is an organizer. He sees opportunity, he jumps towards it. So he forms a party called the People's Federative Party, in parentheses, Bulgarian section. So, chill number 2, I'm sure a lot of you have gotten. Why would he call it the Bulgarian section? Again, uncomfortable to talk about, but within the context of history, it is explainable. First of all, let's not forget the Macedonian identity was still in its infancy. While a number of people did hold to it, it was not universally accepted, much less by the Ottomans, not even by the Macedonians themselves, who, like I said, did not have a concept of a national identity. For them, their identity was a Christian and an Orthodox and a Slavic speaker. Those that did call themselves Bulgarian did so because of the Bulgarian church. But he does call the new political party the Bulgarian section. And another reason for that, of course, is the Bulgarians were a recognized ethnic group within the Ottoman Empire. They gained this when the Ottomans instituted their census kind of method called the RUM system. They did recognize the Bulgarians. So if he's trying to seize on this momentum, he can't start from scratch. The Macedonians are not a recognized people. He has to go with what he has. There's obviously a link with Bulgaria in terms of the church. They are a recognized people. They have their own principality. They are a semi-autonomous state that does exist. So he's using what he has. He's digging up, he's stirring up with what he has. So he does form this party. And it's meant to be a party with other ethnic groups as well. But unfortunately, it only lasts for about a year. And with this stage, like I said, they did have representatives, but it did only start for a year, as other situations did envelop the Ottoman Empire. Basically, they started to go back to their more tyrannical, kind of oppressive, authoritarian means. But while he was there, Yane was very instrumental in petitioning the Ottoman Empire to organize its own empire, basically, into a federation of co-equal states. Equal states in the Balkans, again, separating itself from Bulgaria. And finally, we have in 1909, like I said, other changes started happening when the Ottoman Empire did try to have a counter coup d'etat, meaning a change in government, to restore the Sultan's unlimited authority. Yane did organize over 1,200 Macedonians, along with other Turks and ethnicities, in a march to Istanbul, as Macedonians call it, Tsarigrat, to protest, to make their voices heard against the Ottoman Empire. Like I said, he was an amazing organizer, and he used whatever opportunity was present to him. So he did work with the framework that was given. He did petition the new government to institute more liberal, more modern institutional changes, and like I said, reorganize Macedonia as a state among other states. For most people in Vomero, this was not the MO, not the way they were doing it. They were more about terrorism, acts of violence. Yane was one of the few that was a true diplomat and a warrior at the same time. He used the inner machinations of the Ottoman Empire to push for change. So let's keep going now. We're good on time. I hope I've still caught your attention. Let's move on to what happens in Macedonia after this. This is around 1908. So many of us do know the dates of the Balkan War right off cusp. I mean, it's a very traumatic part. And Yane, as you can imagine, was a very instrumental part in the Balkan Wars. So what are the Balkan Wars? Very briefly. Basically, it was an alliance between various Balkan states, including Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, Montenegro, all joining to finally push out the sick old man of Europe, to finally get rid of the Ottomans and liberate all of the Balkans, especially Macedonia. And Yane, of course, was an integral part of this. He had his militia units. He was still an effective organizer. He still had a military background. He basically ruled the area from the Struma River Valley. And during the Balkan Wars, basically, he did capture the Pirin city of Melnik. In October of 1912, he, along with other insurgents, part of the allied group of the Balkan League, march into Solun, which is, of course, the picture that is right behind me. That is Yane Sandanski marching under the Arch of Galerius in a very briefly liberated Macedonian Solun or Salonika. He did give a toast to a finally free and autonomous Macedonia, paved with the blood of so many patriots and allies of Macedonia. But as he would soon see, that was short-lived. Macedonia was soon in the middle of another war. Basically, Bulgaria envisioned all of Macedonia under its realm. After all, they considered Macedonia their possession and part of their territory since the Middle Ages. So they were not satisfied with the division. So they attacked their former allies and were launched into the Second Balkan War. Now, we have to understand here at this stage is, of course, Macedonia did not see its freedom, but the status quo for Macedonians did change in a number of ways. Like I said previously, while they did nonchalantly refer to themselves as Macedonians and sometimes Macedono-Bulgarians, largely as a result of their upbringing and their church and basically their careers, this brought a whole new variable to the mix. What am I talking about? Well, Serbia, who was a latecomer to the Macedonian question, did begin to launch a very oppressive campaign against the Macedonians. Now, for all the problems Macedonians did have with Bulgarians, and for all the ways they saw themselves as different than they were, like I said, especially young, more rural Macedonians did see themselves as separate as those living in northern Bulgaria. Seeing a new foreign enemy, especially the Serbs, closing down their churches, closing down their schools, did unfortunately push the Macedonians back into Bulgarian hands, arguably even stronger than it was before. If the Macedonian identity was forming independently, this basically reversed it. This broke all progress. And Yane, as much as he was opposed to cooperating directly with Bulgaria, or even involving Bulgaria with the Macedonian question, outside of just a regular ally, he did have to go back to using the Bulgarians. And there's a photo of this that we'll talk about, that the Bulgarians love to discuss in terms of how Bulgarian Yane was and why he was so pro-Bulgarian. We'll get into why that's actually not quite the case. Yane, like I said, was a pragmatist. The new Serbian terror was arguably much worse than anything they'd ever seen before, so they had to find resources wherever they could be found. There's an old saying that Macedonians during this time period, especially the leaders, they would have made a deal with Satan if it meant liberating Macedonia. There was no price that was too high. So one of the, of course, this is a kind of a humorous transition, but they did make allies with people they normally wouldn't. And one of them was, for Yane, was the Albanians. After all, after the Balkan Wars, Albania did become an independent Balkan state. And to curb this newfound Serbian terror, Yane was very instrumental in using the Albanians as another friend and ally against Serbian incursion. And like I said, Yane did want to ally with all the Balkan people. He didn't differentiate. So this was a very profound, pragmatic, and diplomatic move of the Macedonians. However, as we know, it did not last for long. Macedonia was finally divided and partitioned, set in ink on August 10th, 1913. So with that, Yane had to retreat. He retreated into his fortress, into his kingdom, Pirinska Macedonia, which was under Bulgarian occupation. So what does he do there? Well, again, Yane is not going to give up. He still goes with what he has. He's still an organizer. He's still seizing opportunity, and he still works within the legal framework despite not much being there. While in Pirinska Macedonia, he does push for not only reforms in Bulgaria against the authority, very authoritarian monarchy instituted by the Germans. He does push for reforms there. He does push for more involvement in the Macedonian question. And by World War I, he does oppose Bulgarian involvement in the war. So at this stage, he is involved in a number of different situations to push for reforms in Bulgaria. He is a wanted man. There are several assassination attempts on his life. And he's not a popular figure in Bulgaria at this time period, especially the Bulgarian church. They called him basically a devil because of how radical and leftist that he was. So he's making a lot of enemies. He travels with a bodyguard. He knows he's got a very high price tag over his life. And arguably, what finally broke the straw on the camel's back was his plan to launch a coup d'etat, basically a change in government, against the monarchy in Bulgaria and once again push for more liberal, more modern, more progressive reforms. This unfortunately does not succeed. Because of this, he is becoming too much of a liability for the Bulgarians. Not only is he fundamentally against the Bulgarian aim for Macedonia, he is now launching incursions against the government, and he is starting to spark the Macedonian separatist identity, which for Bulgarians was treason. I mean, we're looking at even in the 1870s, attempts by Macedonians to use their local dialect in publications were met with separatist and treasonous cries by the Bulgarians for not using the standard Bulgarian language. Imagine what Yane was doing to them at this time period. So he was a wanted man. And then with everything going on, there was a resurgence of the right-leaning Vomero, which by this stage had largely become directly connected to the Bulgarian state in terms of serving its interests and envisioning more of a Bulgarian ideal for Macedonia. Like I said, it is an uncomfortable portion of our history, but it is our history nonetheless. Now, on April 22nd, 1915, while leaving the Rojan Monastery in the town of Nevrokop, which is in Pirinska, Macedonia, while actually passing through his ancestral village of Vlahi, he is in the middle of the night ambushed and assassinated. Why was he killed? Well, a number of reasons. We're going to get into them in just a couple minutes here. But at the end of the day, he had become too dangerous for the Bulgarian question in Macedonia. And likely speaking, and this is based on research, he was ordered liquidated by the monarch of Bulgaria, none other than Tsar Ferdinand. Not a Bulgarian, actually a Bavarian by descent, but research points to the idea that it was enacted by him. And was carried out, potentially, now this is not confirmed, could have been carried out by the more right-leaning Vomero insurgents led by Todor Alexandrov. Now, this is a very controversial claim to make. I have a whole video on Todor Alexandrov. He did change his views towards the end of his life. He did see the manipulation of the Bulgarian side, but ultimately it was too late. That is still speculation. I'm not going to put my name on it. I'm not going to sign off on it. What you have to understand is it was direct involvement from the Bulgarians that did end his life. So, with that being said, the Bulgarians did see him obviously as a liability. But with everything happening now, Bulgaria does still have to claim all of Macedonia, all Macedonians, as Bulgarians. This has been their policy since the Middle Ages. Of course, they have to claim Yane Sandanski as a Bulgarian. Now, he is rightfully called a very controversial figure in Bulgarian history, and there's a lot of attempts to make him more pro-Bulgarian, which I'm going to show you in just a couple of seconds here. But ultimately, he did strike a nerve with the Bulgarians. Let's talk about a quote here that he did say that will kind of show you why. We don't want to replace the Turkish tyranny, the Turkish sultans, with other tyrants, not even the Bulgarian tyranny or the Bulgarian prince. We're fighting for Macedonia to become an autonomous, independent, free state, Macedonia for the Macedonians. And if you look at other research, particularly by Turkish researchers and historians of the time period, it's pretty open. Yane had unequivocally betrayed the Bulgarian interests of the Bulgarian state. He may have called his political party Bulgarian, he may have used that label, but fundamentally his actions proved otherwise. This is what the Turkish historian was saying. Not only did he oppose unification to Bulgaria, not only did he oppose Bulgarian intervention, he allied with the Ottomans. He allied with Albanians. This was anathema. This was unthinkable to Bulgarians. So for all that he has done, he betrayed their interests. And we have a couple more sources here. We're just good on time. I'm almost wrapping up here. Like I said, at this time period, Macedonians were willing to say, do whatever to get support for Macedonia. If at one point it meant declaring themselves as Bulgarians, they would have done it. If another point it meant declaring themselves as ethnic Macedonians, not Bulgarians, they would have done it. So all the times you're harassed online by Greeks and Bulgarians saying, oh, look at this quote, this means he's Bulgarian. There's another quote that will disprove that one immediately. Because like I said, it was not only a fluid identity, these people were pragmatists. You have to understand this to your bone. We have the same people that were one time saying they're Bulgarians, other times saying they're ethnic Macedonians, direct descendants of Alexander the Great. So this is an interview he gave to the Italian newspaper in 1908, La Italia all'estero. In it, he says, the Macedonians will free Macedonia without involving the neighboring countries. In Macedonia, we do not need Bulgarians, nor Greeks, nor Serbs, nor Romanians, neither the Turks. Here, there should be only Macedonians. And finally, let's just take a broader perspective here on why he was also a controversial figure to the Bulgarians. This is a contemporary primary source by a Greek politician and columnist, journalist, and contemporary of Yane during this time period. Kind of long-winded, but I'll go through it rather quickly. Sandanski, originally from Pirin, Macedonia, belonged to the so-called Slavic-speaking Macedonians. He claimed that just as the Greek, Serbian, and Bulgarian nations had been freed from the Turkish yoke, the time had come for the Macedonian nation to be liberated. In order for Macedonia to become whole and completely independent state, Sandanski preached that all the residents, without exception, are neither Bulgarians, nor Greeks, nor Vlavs, even if they speak the Macedonian dialect, as he himself, or the Greek Kutsulovlaki dialect, which is another way of saying Vlav. And that all the inhabitants of Macedonia are pure Macedonians, descendants of the ancient Macedonians of Philip and Alexander. Bulgarian chauvinists decided to liquidate him because his sermons do not go in their favor, because he opposed Macedonia's ascension to Bulgaria. He prevented the Slavophone population of Macedonia from considering itself Bulgarian and cultivating a Bulgarian national consciousness. Did you catch that? Liquidated by the Bulgarian chauvinists because he was an impediment to the Bulgarian idea for Macedonia. So let's just take a look at really quickly the lessons of I want you to know about Yane Sandanski, and we'll open up the floor to some questions. 1. Macedonia's future has to be local, has to be a regional phenomena, cannot be stimulated nor supported directly by foreign actors. Sure, we can have allies, sure, we can have friends, but Macedonia's future has to be local, has to be regional. Every gift from a neighbor does come with a price tag, and Yane understood this clearly. And with all the bloodshed you saw from Vomero, assassination attempts left and right, we can see two things. First of all, nobody has a claim to Vomero's legacy. Sorry to tell you, Vomero does not exist anymore. It died out after Ilinden, arguably. There were attempts to resurrect it, especially in the 30s, but I would argue the lineage to the original Vomero is tenuous. It is for sure not our modern day Vomero. Most of Vomero were socialists, not the modern Vomero being more center-right, but I digress. It's an extinguished part of our history, and as many people like to dress up and pretend that they're Vomero, they're not. No one's a direct successor. The more we try to fight and bicker as to who is the correct version, who has the claim, the more our enemies feed off our division. Yane did pay the price for this. He did see the problem with this. And unfortunately, it did contribute to his downfall, but that cannot be repeated in our future. And finally, what were Yane's weapons? It was not his rifle, it was not his gun. It was diplomacy. It was professionalism. It was activism. He was an excellent organizer. He lived in the mountains. He organized the people. He could move entire villages on command. This is the number one lesson I want you to know about Yane's life and what he means for the Macedonian people, being called the Prince of Pirin. If we're not on the table, we are on the menu. If we're not on the table, we are on the menu. Yane understood this perfectly. Even if he had to go to the Ottoman parliament with a Bulgarian party, he would go there because he was on the table. Even if he had to cozy up to Albanians and Bulgarians, he did it because he had to be on the table. Even if he had to change his beliefs to accommodate changing circumstances, he put himself out there. He used legalism, he used professionalism, he used diplomacy. He never extinguished his spirit in fighting for Macedonia. Many say, one of his famous quotes is, to live is to fight, the slave for freedom, and the freedman for perfection. However, I give you another quote about Yane that he said himself. As I worked in the mountains, I will continue to work for the sacred fatherland with heart and soul in any kind of duty for which the fatherland employs me, any kind of task the fatherland expects of me at any given time. Spoken like a true prince in service to his people. And on this day, a Macedonian prince was killed by division, by chauvinism, and by all the problems that continue to plague our Macedonian people. Learn from him, study from him, don't make him your hero, take what he stood for and push it forward, make it your own cause. Okay, so with that, I do want to thank you. I'm going to open up the floor to some questions now. We're doing okay on time. We did start a little bit late. Let's just take a look here. Okay, so I have a question from Robert. When Yane marched through Solun, was Macedonia fully liberated at the time, then partitioned by the Bucharest Treaty? Yane did give a toast to a fully liberated Macedonia because that was the assumption. The allies of the Balkans finally formed together to push the Ottomans from Macedonia. So it was very briefly liberated, but it was still under direct occupation from foreign armies. They weren't just going to leave. That was the assumption, that they would go in, fight, and just leave, create a Macedonian state. Not heavy. That's why I said every gift from a neighbor does come with a price tag. So it was initially liberated, but then they fought again as to who would gain the spoils from the war. And of course, that resulted in another Balkan War, and finally the full partition of Macedonia in 1913. What are some resources we can look into further research for Yane's life? Is a question from Philip. There are a number of good resources. I consulted actually some primary sources that are found not on Wikipedia, but the sources under Wikipedia, actually the Macedonian Wikipedia. A lot of good sources there, a lot of good links, a lot of good books. Like I said, if you can stomach hearing uncomfortable things and know that it doesn't diminish your identity one bit, definitely do check them out. Another good source, just understanding the framework, would be the book by Duncan Perry about Vimara, which I'm gonna send a link to that once I get the title. I'm kind of blanking on it. It's a very sought after book. You can probably get it from a library, though it is quite rare. I have a question. Why did Albania gain independence but not Macedonia, even though we're in similar situations? And how did Albania gain Malo Prespa and Golobrdo? That's an excellent question. A lot more goes into that than I can take the time right now. Basically, they're different allies. They were sufficiently different enough from their neighbors to where nobody else wanted to claim them. Did not happen with Macedonia. And they'd have direct support from parts of the West as well. I can get into that. You can message me a little bit later if you do want to talk about that a little bit more. How do I feel about trolling Greek group chats that deny the history of Macedonia? With that, I would say don't waste your time. Stick to what you know. Don't reduce yourself to our neighbors. I mean, these are people that have unlimited hours devoted to just trolling on the internet, tweeting, posting, what have you. We're better than that. We know what we're about. Stick to what you know. Don't go, looking for trouble. It's just not worth the time. It's not worth your time. We have much better things to do. Why was Yane called a prince even though he was not born into royalty? Well, some people are born into royalty and they don't serve our interests. Tsar Samuel was one of them. Yane, though born a poor peasant, unequivocally served the interests of his people left and right and became mythical because of it. His name, Prince of Pirin, is a label of adoration and adornment by the Macedonians, knowing what he represented to the people and how Pirin was literally his kingdom. I mean, he ruled that with his efficiency, with his networks, with his organization. It's a term of endearment, not an actual tzar. To me, though, he was a tzar. And finally, was the manipulation of Macedonians in the Bulgarian army common? And what consequences were there if they showed resistance to their agendas? Well, like I said, you definitely didn't want to be seen as a separatist by the Bulgarians. The whole idea of the Bulgarian church and the Bulgarian schools was to produce Bulgarians in Macedonia. There were many competing ideas as to who the Macedonians were. Greeks during this time period considered Macedonians to be Greeks, ancient Macedonians, that has since become Slavicized. So Bulgarians had another idea completely. So anybody that was able to basically go to school or go to military academy, that represented at most 5% of the population in Macedonia. Most of Macedonia was agrarian, was peasant, and illiterate. So the ones that were able to escape from it, best thing they had was Bulgarian institutions. So naturally they would have been shaped to form Bulgarian interests. And there was resistance. Anything that was seen as separatist, such as more local dialects or more regionalism, was denounced by the Bulgarians. But the assumption of the time period was, for all intents and purposes, that Bulgarians and Macedonians were one people. Now, how much that is true, of course, is clearly the question, but you have to understand, the Macedonian identity was not developed. Whatever they had, they took with it, and they were products of their time. Just simply was not as developed. Okay. Question. Okay, and finally, let's see, what my dedo and Lidinsku, I've heard of Jane's murder in real time. Very potentially. I mean, this was a very traumatic moment in the history of Macedonia. I mean, he died in 1915. I've gone to villages where Komiti were killed in 1903, betrayed. The villagers still remember from the stories that are passed down exactly what happened. And finally, do want to leave you off with this song about Yane that is in the chat, but I want you to see the last line, just to give you a little dose of inspiration from your favorite armchair historian here. So one moment here. So anybody that has watched my videos before knows this is piston.org, and this is a translation that, of course, I made, so a little bit of a self shout out. But basically it talks about Yane finally being wounded, and metaphorically speaking, how 3 hawks came to him, one from each part of Macedonia, coming back with a medicine to cure him, trying to save his life. But finally, this is what we have here. This is Yane speaking in the song. "Oh, you 3 hawks, I'm wounded in the heart. Leave me alone here so I can die. Medicine will not cure me. Macedonia will give birth to others who will free her." Who will free her. Make it you. Make it your generation. Use legalism, use opportunity. If you're not on the table, you're on the menu. Appreciate your time tonight, folks. If you have any other questions, please reach out to me. I love talking to anybody that does want to ask questions. If we don't know each other, let's change that. We want to thank you for your time. We do have a couple more events coming up. I don't know if Mito does want to talk about that. But as always, do stay safe and keep fighting for Macedonia. I'll see you again soon.
Mario, thank you so much. This was extremely educational and informative, and especially on the 105th anniversary of Yane Sandanski's assassination. I want to thank everybody for participating. We can't wait till our 4th and final Mario's History Talks next Wednesday, April 29th. Same time on the topic Wikipedia Warriors, the new front lines in the battle for Macedonia. We're also planning out our May schedule of virtual hours, so stay tuned to our announcements on social media and via email. Tomorrow is Macedonian Trivia Night, and we want to ask you, how well do you know your Macedonian history, sports, music, and various miscellaneous topics? Join us. We included the link to register in the chat. Also, if you've been enjoying our virtual events, please consider supporting UMD and our Young Leaders Program Generation M through the link that we posted from Facebook or visiting our website, umdiaspora.org. And please encourage others to help out as well. On behalf of UMD and Generation M, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Stay home, stay safe, and stay healthy. Good night, or have a great day in Australia. And thank you very much, Mario, for all your phenomenal presentations these last 3 virtual hours. And this was probably by far one of my favorite, and I'm sure next week is going to be even better. So thank you, Mario.